Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Mike Whitmer. I'm Vice President of NCMIC's Chiropractic Insurance Programs. Welcome to part 3 of our webinar series about the new book, Contain and Eliminate. Before we begin, I apologize, but we are having technical issues with the GoToWebinar platform, and it's not allowing us to share our cameras. We had all planned to be on camera with you, but that's not possible today, but we will continue. So to recap, last week we aired 2 webinars which told the story of the American Medical Association's illegal boycott against the chiropractic profession and the landmark legal case Wilk v. AMA. Those webinars were pre-recorded accounts of the events surrounding the case and are available under the resources section of ncmic.com. The new book lays out a detailed account of all aspects of the case, much more so than we were able to in the 2 webinars that we presented last week. For the complete story, the book can be purchased through Dynamic Chiropractic. The website is www.dynamicchiropractic.com/book. Proceeds from the book will be donated to the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress, the NCMIC Foundation, and the Association for the History of Chiropractic. Today, for the final webinar in the series, we're coming to you live and are joined by 3 people who were involved with the trial to answer your questions. Why is this important? The Wilk v. AMA case was a hard-fought battle, the consequences of which are felt by every chiropractor practicing today. It kicked open doors long shut to chiropractors. It demolished barriers to practice and lessened old stigmas and perceptions about the profession. Plus, it's an amazing story of persistence and perseverance amongst some real cloak and dagger spy novel intrigue. So let me introduce our panelists. First, we have George McAndrews, who was the attorney representing the chiropractic plaintiffs in Wilk v. AMA. Next, we have Howard Walensky, a former reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times and author of the new book, Contain and Eliminate. Howard covered the trial in the 70s and 80s. And we have Dr. Lou Sportelli, who was involved in the case and has been a leader in the chiropractic profession for decades. We've collected questions from our listeners over the past week. If you have additional questions you would like to pose to our panelists, please enter them into the questions feature on your GoToWebinar menu. We'll address those questions as time allows. So again, thank you for listening and thank you to our guests for joining us today. So let's begin. First question goes to George McAndrews, the attorney for the plaintiffs. George, you made a lot of professional sacrifices to take this case. What other impact did taking this case have on your practice? And were there other impacts on your partners and or your firm?
It was a dream come true. I was asked by my brother to take the case, but after he had asked me to call the 8 largest law firms in Chicago to see if they would take it. I called them and they were all shocked. They said, "Are you out of your mind, George? Chicago is the capital of American medicine. We have medical schools, we have hospitals, and we have headquarters for many of the societies, but particularly the AMA here. It's just obvious that we're not taking a case that involves the chiropractors." And I turned the case over to my brother and I said, go to Washington, D.C. They're not so worried about conflicts. And he came back a week later and he said, "George, your dad would kick the lid off his coffin if you didn't take this case. You know all about chiropractic. You know all about the history of the bearishness that the medical world heaped on the chiropractic profession." I took about a week to think about it and then decided. I went to my partners. I had partners that said, we have children that are medical doctors. We are intellectual property law firm. Don't take it. And I deliberated all of that and decided if they needed a good lawyer, who knew the background, I was it, simply because I grew up in a chiropractic household and had a brother and a sister and a father and now a daughter that are chiropractors. It improved my position in the legal world. I ended up starting my own firm, and in 5 years, the size of our firm increased over the size of the firm that I left. I ended up with a win in the case, and that got me more clients. So I have to be happy about everything. I met many people, and many of them are on this story today. But I think it was improvement for my entire life, and certainly answered the problems I had when growing up. I can answer any other questions you have.
Okay.
I just want to tell you that I'm happy I took the case.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to go to Howard Wolensky. Howard, sore throat, the informant in the story who was linked to Scientology, played a pivotal role in the story. Did you ever have the opportunity to talk to the informant or interview him?
Well, the brief answer is no. And maybe later on we can get into more details, but in effect, the best I can tell, there were actually two sore throats. One in the early 70s and one in the mid 70s who worked in tandem with the first sore throat. He wasn't called sore throat till 75, and of course that was a takeoff on Deep Throat and All the President's Men and the overthrow of the Nixon administration. But I do know somebody on this call who talked to sore throat number one, and that's Lou Sportelli. Maybe Lou could tell us a little bit about his experience.
Dr. Sportelli?
Yeah, he was actually, sore throat was a very interesting character in terms of the fact that he didn't want to talk to you. And when we finally, he used a voice synthesizer because he was paranoid about the fact that the AMA would recognize his voice. And so during the early 70s, before the case began, he had wanted to get chiropractors to really get excited about this thing and take up the case. And so I got a hold of him through somebody in the profession by the name of Peter Flom. Sore throat called me, and we got him to talk to us as a group, a small group, and then to talk to the Parker seminar. And he again used the voice synthesizer, but he was very disappointed that the profession wasn't more aggressive in their attitude about taking on this case.
Okay.
Mike, maybe I can add something too.
Sure. Go ahead, Howard.
This, what I refer to as sore throat number one, the one who first contacted Lou and also Chester Wilk and a few others and Peter Flom, he was part of a secret organization within the Church of Scientology called the Guardian's Office. That was their spy and dirty trick organization. And these guys were very shrewd. The AMA was having all kinds of problems, especially in the mid 60s to the mid 70s. I'm talking about financial and political problems. And they were on the verge of bankruptcy in 1975, and they had a layoff of about 80 people. It was known as the May Day Massacre. It took place on May 1st, 1975. And the Scientologists were able to claim that sore throat, he liked to call himself Dr. Throat, by the way, but they claimed that he was one of the people laid off. and they totally buffaloed the AMA management. You know, they spent a lot of time trying to figure out who this guy could be, and it took a while for them to catch on that it was actually an outsider who had, well, in this case, actually infiltrated the AMA's offices in Chicago and in Washington and gone through files. There was an earlier raid with the other sore throat. I mean, this gets complicated. You need a
Yeah.
scorecard. And that's why you got to read the book, right?
Exactly.
At any rate, I'll turn it back to you, Mike. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Sportelli, the AMA was the focus of the Wilk v. AMA case, obviously. Were there other organizations that were aggressively anti-chiropractic?
I think any medical organization with the word American in front of it could fit that bill, Mike. I mean, we go on from the American Heart Association, the American Cancer Society, American Arthritis Association, anybody with the name American in front of it. But let me also suggest just how nefarious the AMA was. And that is all of those other organizations from the American Cancer, American Arthritis, and so forth and so on, American Heart Association. The AMA actually wrote their opinion papers, anti-chiropractic, for them. And then they gave it to these organizations. And then they said, look, we're not the only ones. Look at all of these other organizations in healthcare who have similar views about chiropractic. I mean, it was an absolute brilliant plan of execution that they got to make sure that the public thought that everybody was anti-chiropractic. It was a masterful plan, well executed.
Yeah, in fact, the Wilk v. AMA case, it was AMA at all, correct? There were other organizations that were named defendants on the case.
Yeah, everybody, they sued the American Radiology Association, American Academy of Family Physicians. I mean, you name it, any group that was essentially affiliated with the AMA were involved in the initial litigation and name.
Thank you.
I can contribute something to that.
Sure, George, go ahead.
The AMA was determined not to be identified. They supplied Ann Landers, Epi Lederer, if you all know who she was, with information for her columns. She knew very little about chiropractic. She had gone to one chiropractor at her sister's home out in Washington, D.C., excuse me, the state of Washington. And she tried to avoid me when she found out that I was trying to serve her with a subpoena. And she stayed in her apartment for 2 days while I sat outside in the car waiting, watching the front door to see if she would come out. And it turned out that she was given all sorts of privileges by the AMA. They not only made contributions to her financial status, they let her go to China when China opened the doors to the AMA. And she flew over there with the chairman of the board of the AMA, and she considered that very, very helpful. I went to a Notre Dame, by the way, I'm a graduate of Notre Dame, a double graduate. I went to a reception that Notre Dame had, and she was there. And when she saw me, her jaw dropped. She was concerned because the deposition of her was very, very bad. It made her look like she was for sale. And she knew it. And I told her I didn't have anything personal against her. I just hoped she would understand that we couldn't have her ghostwriting for the AMA. All right. That was the interesting part of it. But that's the way the AMA operated. They used some thugs. The worst thug of all was Joseph Sabatier, MD. He called chiropractors all over the country rabid dogs and killers. That was his definition of chiropractors. And I took his deposition, and I couldn't believe how insane he was. God bless him now. I know he passed away, but he was just terrible.
Hmm.
I went up to Michigan, and the book talks about how I parked the car and ate my peanut butter sandwiches so that I could get depositions from the Michigan people, not realizing that Sabatier was talking to them on the weekend I went up there. And I could tell from the depositions I took that he was very vicious. He died, I understand, I could be corrected on this, that he was 100 years old when he passed away. But he was the worst enemy, I believe, of chiropractic. And now some of you can come up with other names, but he ended up being chairman of the Committee on Chiropractic, which was originally called the Committee on Competition. And then they changed it to Committee on Chiropractic so the public would understand that they were directing their activities toward chiropractors. All right, I just want to add that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And just for our listeners that might not be familiar, Ann Landers was a syndicated columnist. And when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, it was, she was in every newspaper and extremely wide read.
Mike,
Yes.
George's characterization of Dr. Sabatier is very kind, actually. That we have a taped interview of Sabatier, and people will in the profession sometimes wonder why those of us who had been involved in the process feel this kind of passion relative to this situation. And let me give you one example that will probably shock most people. Sabatier had a plan, and his plan was that that medical physicians would essentially be a part of the AMA's conspiracy, and that they would, in essence, go to the legislatures of the various states as well as Congress, and they would know the background and history, diagnosis, and medications of almost every legislator. Now, for those of you who are probably over 50, remember the situation with Thomas Eagleton, who ran for the Congress, and basically, when it was discovered that he had depression, his whole campaign blew up in smoke. Well, Sabatier wanted to have a network of physicians across the country that they could call, the AMA could call when there was ever a bill. They could call and talk to the physician who took care of the legislator, just to sort of let them know that they knew that they should probably vote this way on that bill. I mean, that's how deep this entire matter went, right down to the very physicians to the legislator.
Thank you. All right. I want to go back to Howard. Howard, why did the AMA do this in the first place? Why did they work so hard to contain and eliminate the profession of chiropractic?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned a little earlier, the AMA was having all kinds of problems. In the mid-60s, it led a battle to try to stop this radical new idea called Medicare, aimed at helping elderly people with their health issues, so that they could see doctors in their old age. And the AMA portrayed this as socialism, and basically, kind of pinned its reputation on trying to stop the Medicare law. Well, they failed. In the long run, from the medical doctor's point of view, that was a good thing, because Medicare is what made the medical doctors rich. But at any rate, the AMA, in the eyes of its true believers, was a failure because they couldn't stop Medicare. They were, they started to lose membership, they started to lose power. And so this is one of George's lines about, when things are bad in China, China invades Tibet. Well, in this case, the AMA was the giant China, and the chiropractors were the peaceful Tibetan Buddhists, I suppose. And so the AMA needed a fall guy, and they made chiropractic the enemy. This was, something that they could rally the forces, rally the boys and girls around the flag, and they went after chiropractic. And basically, in the state of Iowa, around that time, this is where chiropractic got started, and chiropractic had pretty good success in Iowa. Basically, for every 4 medical doctors in Iowa, there was 1 chiropractor. That was the ratio. So it was, 4 to 1. Nationally, it was 10 to 1. And so this lawyer named Robert Throckmorton, he was the general counsel for the Iowa Medical Society. And he came up with a plan to try to destroy the chiropractors in Iowa. And his approach was to, quote, contain and eliminate chiropractic. And of course, that's the name of the book. And the idea grew. Throckmorton gave a speech to a group of Midwestern medical societies, and the AMA was represented there. And they were so impressed with Throckmorton that they hired him to launch a program, through the AMA's office on quackery, committee on quackery. And so Throckmorton came, and then he brought along the brother of his boss from the Iowa Medical Society. The brother of his boss was a guy named H. Doyle Taylor. And Taylor was, he trained as a lawyer. A lot of lawyers in this story. And he also was the night city editor at the Des Moines Register. So he was kind of a savvy guy, I guess. And Throckmorton brought him over, and Doyle Taylor's job was to implement this plan to contain and eliminate chiropractic. And so he's the one who set it into motion in, I think 65. And, George, I think, has a lot of fond memories of Doyle Taylor. You might ask him about that.
Yes, he skipped out on a deposition the night before he was supposed to appear on the stand, and went to Phoenix. And then his son testified that he was no longer physically or mentally able to take the stress. And the judge allowed me to take his deposition. First of all, I was able to get an osteopath to give him a physical. And when the judge read the osteopath's report, she said in open court, "This fella's healthy enough to walk to Chicago from Phoenix." And he became, after that time, a principal witness. We needed him desperately. If I may, I would like to add 3 things.
Sure, go ahead.
I was always I understood that I represented chiropractors. My life had been involved with chiropractors and chiropractic. What I wanted to do was, I found out that 3 MDs could have changed their MD to DC, and yet they were famous Dr. Per Freitag, whom I hope I am mistaken, but I think he passed away. But he was a professor at Northwestern University, and he was an orthopedic surgeon, and he was on 2 hospital staffs. And he kept saying that he did his own testing. When someone with bad back would come in, every other patient he would send to a chiropractor, or he would send them to his staff, the medical, and he came up with the concept on his own that the chiropractors were twice as efficient as the MDs. I wanted to scream with joy when I saw that. After that, I gave his telephone number to chiropractors that called me. Then you'll probably remember I.E. Hendryson, MD. He was in command at Guadalcanal, and he was in charge of the wounded that came in with traumatic injuries, not just diseases. And he decided, because he was interested, he decided to get a chiropractor to show his orthopedic surgeons how to take care of the bad backs that came in. There were a lot of them. They were from grenades and bombs and that. And he found out that he had 8 guys that practiced chiropractic, and I think he had 10 orthopedic surgeons. And he said he didn't think it was very nice for the poor old soldiers, but the ones the chiropractor cared for wounded got back to the front lines twice as quickly as did the ones that were taken care of by the orthopedic surgeons. Now he became a trustee of the AMA, and we had a document that was top secret. The document that the AMA suppressed was his report on how good the chiropractors and chiropractic care was for a traumatic injury to the spine. And they kept it, and they had documents saying his report cannot be shown to anyone. It would be misunderstood. Well, there was another nice thing about it in the document. It talked about women in pregnancy and chiropractic care when they came to term. And he said, I was amazed at the issue. I let women within 2 weeks of birth use chiropractic care, and I found out they didn't need the troublesome drugs they gave women to cut down on their pain during delivery. And he said it was amazing. And Judge Getzendanner, when she saw that and found out there were about 15 times when they said we can't allow that information to get out, she slammed her hammer down on the desk so hard, I think she broke the head off the hammer. She said, are you kidding me? That the AMA sponsored this and then wanted to keep it quiet? Do you realize I'm a mother? That what this means to me, that I didn't have to take all those drugs and the chiropractic care would have helped me out. That was just delightful. And then the last one, of course, I'm sure most of you have heard of him, Dr. John McMillan Manel. He was a professor, he was an author, he was a genius, and he helped chiropractic enormously with the way he wrote. He's the one that said that only 2% of the MD's training was on neuromusculoskeletal problems, and that the chiropractor took better care of the neuromusculoskeletal problems than the MDs did because they weren't taught it. And I referred chiropractors to him. I believe he's passed away now too, but you can see the story in the book contain and eliminate book, it spells that out. I think that information should be put in a separate section because you have to read the whole book to catch it. And it's so vitally important because it was exactly what I learned growing up in Clinton, Iowa with tractor back. We'd go out in the middle of the night and take patients. We had to take them from 1 to 2 o'clock in the morning because if the patient found out, if the MD found out that the patient was seeing a chiropractor, the MD would automatically stop seeing him. And so I grew up in that back seat of the car with my brothers. We rotated around, and yet here we had just information like I learned. We called it tractor back. And the MDs didn't know how to take care of it. And my father had a rich clientele of farmers. And after my father's death, the farmers would come up to me after Mass or something on Sunday and give me a hug with tears in their eyes, saying that he helped them get through because there was nothing the MD could do to help them with tractor back. And there's nothing a farmer needs to know more than how to drive a tractor during planting or fertilizing or reaping the plants than the tractor.
Yeah.
Those were old-fashioned tractors that bounced around all over. I think they still do. Okay, I'll shut up now.
As a native Iowan, I can attest to that.
Okay, who's a native of Iowa?
I am, George, Mike Whitmer here, and I actually grew up in your hometown of Clinton. So
you mentioned that to me.
Yeah, so I'm well familiar with that, so thank you. Howard, coming back to you, this story has a lot of shocking events and details. What did you find most shocking as you were covering the story and as you did research for the book?
I should mention, in case the audience doesn't know, that I was a reporter for the AMA newspaper. And, of all odd things, I was called on to cover the Wilk trial. Everybody else was out of town. I was the low man on the totem pole, and everybody else was out at a meeting in San Francisco. And so it was pretty shocking to hear how the AMA treated other professionals. Just had the feeling sitting in the courtroom and learning that something bad had happened. And I'd say that was shock number one. And I reported on this in the AMA newspaper. And the AMA newspaper, AM News, had a reputation for fairness and balance. And that had been my experience up to that point. I'd been there maybe 9 months at that point. And so I wrote this coverage of this trial, and I did it chronologically. And lo and behold, when the team got back to Chicago from San Francisco, I got called on the carpet by the editor of the newspaper and the deputy general counsel of the AMA. And basically, they had been called on the carpet, and the top people had asked them, so, okay, you're covering this trial, when are you going to start telling our side? And so, I definitely was put on warning. So that was shock number one. Shock number two was learning as much as I did about the role of the Church of Scientology in all of this. Not in what the AMA's behavior was, but just how the story of the AMA's behavior came out. That was an amazing story. It was spy versus spy versus spy. The chiropractors, as far as I could tell, didn't have any spies, but they certainly were spied on by the AMA. And then the Scientologists, going back to 1950, had actually, to be specific, 51, had a vendetta against the AMA because L. Ron Hubbard, the founder, science fiction writer who created a church, felt that he was going to be the conquering hero. He was going to be the person who conquered mental illness with Dianetics. And instead, he was met with ridicule at the hands of the AMA. And that's when he put the AMA on his hate list, his enemies list. And it took years, but eventually Sore Throat and his team infiltrated the AMA and found all these documents that eventually George had to authenticate, but they became part of the background of the lawsuit. So, you know, the amazing thing to me is the CIA or the FBI could have used the spy network that Scientology had. Scientologists were trying to find out what was the AMA's conspiracy against Scientology. Instead, their infiltrations and break-ins led them to discover the AMA's campaign against chiropractic and the work of the Committee on Quackery. And so I would say, well, I should mention, not only did this crew break into the AMA, but they also broke into the CIA, which I mentioned, the IRS, the Justice Department, Coast Guard Intelligence, like 30 major organizations. And it's just amazing, you know, what they did. And they finally got caught. It was sort of like the Watergate story. In Watergate, it was sort of, you know, a rent-a-cop who caught the Watergate burglars. In this case, it was a suspicious librarian in a law library who called the FBI on these guys. He caught them. They talked their way out of it. And it's a long story the book gets into, but eventually one of the Sore Throats ends up in a gulag run by the Church of Scientology and with the FBI on his heels. And he hid out for about a year until he figured out that L. Ron Hubbard was going to use him as the fall guy. And so he flipped. And eventually this led to the biggest FBI raid in history, and more documents came out. Anyway, so that's the short version of the long version.
Okay.
So,
All right.
so
Thank you.
those were two things that kind of blew me away.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Howard. George, I'd like to go back to you. George Bua, who presided over the first trial, gave you a basis for an appeal by giving improper instructions to the jury. Do you think that was on purpose? Perhaps the judge needed to find for the AMA, yet the evidence wasn't really there, so he made a decision that protected himself, yet left the door open for an appeal?
I think Judge Bull was an angel from heaven there. I didn't like the instructions to the jury. I made objection. And Judge Bull allowed some of it in because the way they phrased it, they relied on the First Amendment. We weren't using guns and we weren't using blowtorches. All we did was print stuff. You know, it is unethical. And we try to shelter ourselves under the First Amendment of freedom of speech. And he realized when he heard Max Wildman giving his closing argument that they were going to rely on the right, since we didn't find any pistols or rifles or swords or spears, that it was absolutely protected under the First Amendment, free speech.
And George, if I could just clarify, Max Wildman, that was the defense attorney for the AMA, correct?
Yeah, he was probably considered the best attorney in Illinois.
Okay, thank you.
And Fortunately, he's probably in heaven now listening us to talk, listening to how we're talking about him.
But anyway, you were talking about the First Amendment instructions on the for the jury.
Yeah, and it was obvious to me that we didn't have any guns. We didn't have any armed men going in. In fact, I think this is important. On the first day of the trial, they moved to have me dismissed from the case because I was possibly a duplicate for sore throat. They figured I had personally stolen documents. All right. Judge Bua was a gift. I said to Judge Bua, they've charged a working attorney, me, with criminal activity. I demand that I be given access to all of their documents and that the court take all their privileges on those documents away from them, and that they produce every single document that they've gotten about how we got access to the publicly available. A lot of the documents had been printed in little brochures. And Bua said automatically, Mr. McAndrews, that's a good idea. If you're going to waive your privilege on how you got the documents, fine. But they're going to waive theirs because they've already waived it by moving to take a licensed professional out of the case. That was you. All right. Now I'm going to give them 2 weeks to get the documents. They produced almost a yard, 3 feet of documents. And it was obvious that they didn't have any information at all because I hadn't done it. I wasn't doing that kind of search. What I was reading was the documents that were given to me that were fairly obtained, it sounded like always. And the judge knew that. And when we reported back, I said, Your Honor, I'm going to ask if they can produce one document that shows that I somehow cheated somehow to get these documents. And the judge says, Mr. McAndrews, if they even bring up your reputation again in connection with the collection of those documents, they're in trouble. So that's why I liked Judge Bua.
Okay, thank you. We had a question submitted that I want to put out there, probably to Dr. Sportelli. Question is, I heard the AMA lawyers were considering exposing the horrible malpractice rates of chiropractors, and the AMA told them not to do so because it would support the efficacy of chiropractors and weaken the AMA case. Is this fact or fiction? Do you have any insights on that?
I have no information on that, Mike.
Okay.
Although, in all honesty, whenever they try to use malpractice issues, it's a double-edged sword, simply because the risks involved are so disproportionate that the numbers really become meaningless.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So, Dr. Sportelli, I'm gonna stay with you. Why do you think people that are new to the chiropractic profession need to know this story? Why should a chiropractic student or a recent graduate read this book?
Well, while some may consider this to be history, it isn't. We're still living the aftermath, the lingering effects, as the judge said, of this conspiracy in 2021. So any new graduate, any new practitioner of today needs to understand the history and needs to understand what was done and needs to understand how they did it in order to realize in 2021 the issues confronting them. And for example, I give good examples, and that is that when you go to when DCs go to hospitals, for example, there's still a lot of old MDs that still harbor old prejudices and old biases, and most of the time, it's the old joke. You want an old lawyer and a young doctor. The bottom line is that the older lawyers have connections and the young doctors have knowledge. Well, the bottom line is the old doctors are in control. So if you're a chiropractor today, you're not out of the woods at all. And you need to understand that this is not ancient history. This is pretty recent history. 1975 is not terribly old. And the things that we're going through right now in the profession, in terms of breaking glass ceilings that up to now have been essentially taboo, are predicated upon what happened in the Wilkes suit. And I will tell you that some think it wasn't a big deal. Some think it was the most important thing in the history of the profession. But I can tell you that what it did when you think about the fact that a lawyer spent 15 years of his life, George calls it his midlife crisis, on one single case. But the fact of the matter is that the litigation that happened and the success of that case caused everybody to be on high alert in the medical community for fear that whatever they were doing might also be proven to be a conspiracy against the chiropractic community. So everybody kind of changed their view a lot. So the new practitioners today have an easier time of going into various things that we never could do in the early 60s and 70s.
Okay, thank you. All right, we've got time for one more question, and then we'll wrap up. The impact of Wilk v. AMA is far-reaching. In the book, there's an afterword that I found fascinating to read that discusses the impact with chiropractors working in healthcare today. I'd like to start with you, Dr. Sportelli, and what do you see as the legacy of this case?
Well, first of all, let me say that piece of the book that you will read are the stories and the tales of DCs who basically have essentially created a new path, a new direction for themselves and for the profession in areas that up to that point were only dreams. So what's the direction? The direction, as I see it, as we move into a new healthcare, and that is that I believe that within about 10 years or so, the healthcare entire marketplace is going to be degree agnostic. They won't really care what your degree is as much as your scope of competence, as opposed to scope of practice, because it'll be an economic reality. Those that can produce the best results in the cheapest way with the highest degree of patient satisfaction will be the way in which those controlling the networks are going to be viewing all healthcare. I don't care what kind of healthcare you're talking about, and of course, people minimize the musculoskeletal problems because there's nothing sexy about it. But if you look at the cost of healthcare, back pain particularly, and the cost of lost time from work and disability, lost time productivity, it is an enormous sum of money. Not as sexy as finding a cure for cancer or attempting to deal with heart attacks and all of that. But now where they're starting to realize that back pain and musculoskeletal pain is a huge component and expense of the healthcare system. So you're starting to see a reversal of the way in which people view going to the most effective, least invasive. And you're starting to see that. And actually that came about in a rather unfortunate way, and that is the opioid crisis really caused that shift in thinking. So the future of of our profession as chiropractors in the future is going to be certainly in integration. It's going to certainly be involved in institutional care and hospital care, and in a great deal to do with research. But the day of the solo practitioner of any kind is really pretty much a timed out situation. It won't be possible to be a solo practitioner. So the way in which the profession is going to go is going to be in integrated care in some way, shape, or form. And this trial and this book and this whole mindset of where we need to go for tomorrow is going to be predicated on research, and it's going to be predicated on the ability for chiropractors to demonstrate that they fit into an integrated system.
Okay, thank you. Howard, any thoughts on the legacy of the Wilk v. AMA case?
Well, it's hard to top the master, right?
Indeed.
I mean, I think there's few people as thoughtful about this as Lou. I mean, what I witnessed in my research was that you can find chiropractors working in places and spaces that you never could have dreamed of before the Wilk decision. I'm not saying that, that they're dominant, but, but I think it's more than tokenism. It's like, as Lou was saying, it's sort of the start of something bigger going into the future. And this includes chiropractors involved in research, chiropractors serving on joint committees with the AMA, chiropractors publishing in MD journals, and maybe MDs publishing in chiropractic journals. So as Lou said, it's, I think we can look forward to more integration. I think chiropractic needs to devote itself more to research, get more chiropractors involved in the research enterprise. And that's my thought. I'd love to hear what George has to say.
Yeah. George, any thoughts as we wrap up here on the ongoing legacy of the Wilk v. AMA case?
It's everything. The illegal activities of the AMA were designed to keep the chiropractors from having valid research. I just mentioned Per Freytag, Henderson, and John McMillan Manel. Those three people compared the work of a chiropractor with the work of an MD, and in each case they came out with 2 to 1. You had, I'm going to think, I'm not right on this, there's been 440,000 deaths from the opioid crisis. If I'm wrong, correct me. That was caused because the medical world didn't have a solution for that pain except to give them some stronger pain reliever every time they came in. And then they became addicted to it. I think that the AMA knew early on that if you allowed doctors like Freytag, Henderson, and McMillan Manel, who by the way, became believers in chiropractic, that the chiropractors profession would grow monstrously, because what is it? 50–60% of the body is musculoskeletal or related to it. And the medical world studied in their schools, they didn't study musculoskeletal medicine. They had to give them the drugs that have killed them. So I'm sorry, but that's why I think they didn't want interprofessional cooperation on research.
Mm-hmm.
They had to keep them away, because you see the 3 MDs that did have interprofessional cooperation, and they came out recognizing the validity of chiropractic adjustments exactly the way I was able to see it when my dad took care of all these patients at home. The patients would come, they'd come with terrible pain, and they'd hug me and my brothers who were playing out in the yard when they got rid of the pain. And anyway, I'll end there.
Amazing.
But
Thank
you
you.
can see why
Mike,
I was happy to take the case.
Yes.
Mike, there's one more
Sure.
component I think that's important for the chiropractic profession to understand and sometimes realize. We don't have anything to sell, and we don't have multi-billion-dollar companies, pharmaceutical companies, tobacco companies, and Howard failed to mention the 10 million, the grant that the AMA took for the tobacco. We don't have that in chiropractic. All we have is a profession that is conservative. It is able to do a great job, but there's not much money involved. So Jerry Maguire was right when he said, follow the money. And that's whenever you look at a big issue, you got to really follow the money. And one of the things that the profession has been hampered by, and that is that whatever we did for the last 125 years of our existence, everything that chiropractic did, it paid for itself. If there was money in the left pocket, it paid it and it went into the right pocket. We paid for everything we ever did, whether it was legislative, litigation, or research. We did not have benefactors. And that's why if I have to close, I'll close on a sale note. That's why the NCMIC Foundation is so important, because we now have about $17 million. We're looking at 25. Why are we looking for contributions to get it up to 25 million? Because that investment income will spin us off $1 million a year of investment income that won't have to come out of the pockets and the blood, sweat, and tears of the chiropractors. We've never had a benefactor. We've never had pharmaceuticals. We've never had products. We've never had things that made money. And that's been one of the biggest drawbacks to the chiropractic advancement, is our lack of funding.
Okay. Thank you. All right. We're almost at the top of the hour here, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's webinar, episode 3 of the Contain and Eliminate story. I'd like to thank Howard Wolinski, George McAndrews, and Dr. Lou Sportelli for taking time with us to share this piece of chiropractic history. If you're interested in getting a copy of the book, Contain and Eliminate, go to www.dynamicchiropractic.com/book for more information. Before we go, I have a few reminders. Yeah, go ahead.
I just ordered 40 more copies and I'm paying for them.
Excellent. Before I go, I have a few more reminders. A recording of this webinar will be available at ncmic.com later this afternoon. All registered attendees will automatically receive the recording via email. And remember, the first 2 episodes in the series are available at ncmic.com as well. While there, be sure to check out the resources section of ncmic.com. We're continually adding to our content with information to help you navigate daily practice and deal with challenges that you're facing. We have information out there on a wide variety of topics, including COVID issues and risk management, so please check that out. You can also keep up to date on new resources from NCMIC by following us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. I'd also like to remind you that our new podcast, Chiropractical, we have a new episode out and available. Remember, you can download episodes of Chiropractical at ncmic.com or wherever you find your podcasts. One more update. Our next webinar is going to be Thursday, January 21st at 2 p.m. Central Time. We have a great program lined up with our guest, Dr. Elise Hewitt, discussing 5 key history questions to document the potential presence of joint dysfunction in babies and young children. I hope you'll be able to join us for that. Once again, thank you for joining us, and thank you to our panelists. I hope everybody has a great week and a great new year.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you.